new details are emerging about the condition of Gene Hackman's body when he was found.
The FBI just uncovered something insane in Gene Hackman's mansion, and it's got everyone asking way too many questions, because whatever was hiding in there wasn't meant to be found, and now it's causing a serious meltdown behind closed doors.
I don't have a lot of fears. I have the normal fear of passing away. You know, I guess we all think about that.
Either he knew something he shouldn't have, or someone made sure he'd never talk.
As we're learning incredible new details this hour about the circumstances surrounding his death.
And believe me, I'm not making this up. The details speak for themselves because Gene Hackman's death wasn't just unusual, it was downright disturbing. 9 days passed before anyone discovered that he and his wife, Betsy Arakawa, had died inside their Santa Fe mansion.
Right now, the best clue into when the 95-year-old actor died continues to be his pacemaker, which the sheriff says last showed activity on February 17th, nearly 10 days before the couple was discovered.
Their front door was left wide open. 2 of their dogs were roaming the property without food, and another was found dead inside a crate. It wasn't the kind of scene you'd expect from a quiet, peaceful passing. When 2 maintenance workers finally stepped inside, they were met with an unsettling silence that sent them straight to the authorities.
Are they moving at all?
No, dude, they're not moving. Just send somebody out here really quick.
Okay, my units are on their way, okay?
Santa Fe police arrived first. That's how it always starts. An elderly couple, unresponsive in their home, no immediate signs of foul play, standard protocol. But within hours, everything changed. Before local detectives could even file their preliminary reports, federal agents were already on site.
It's concerning that everyone in the house, including the dog, is deceased.
A Santa Fe police detective, frustrated by the sudden federal takeover, told reporters, "We've handled high-profile deaths before, but never have we been told to step aside this fast." It was like they knew exactly what they were looking for before we even finished taking statements. For reference, the FBI doesn't show up to private deaths. They don't handle aging celebrities passing away in their homes. That's for local authorities, medical examiners, or at most, state investigators. The FBI steps in for one reason only: national security, classified evidence, or the kind of crime that reaches beyond city limits. So why was a 95-year-old retired actor's home suddenly a federal crime scene? At first, their presence was brushed off as protocol, maybe something looked off in the initial findings. But then, the house was locked down. No leaks to the press, no reports, just a quiet, immediate takeover. Then came the first real shock. As forensic teams swept the property, a room was discovered, one that wasn't listed on the house's floor plans. It wasn't an attic, a storage space, or an old forgotten study. It was something deliberately hidden. Behind a bookcase, sealed off from plain sight, the room was small, windowless, and packed with something no one expected: documents.
You know, this is where the dead come to teach the living. The bodies may tell us more than the scene. It's probably going to have to come together to come to one answer.
These weren't scripts, contracts, or old Hollywood memorabilia. They were files. Some were yellowed with age, decades old, while others looked recently accessed. And right there, stamped in bold ink on several of them, were 2 words that changed the course of the entire investigation. Confidential, eyes only. That's federal classification. It's the kind of label found on government intelligence, sealed case files, and documents that aren't supposed to exist outside restricted offices. And yet, here they were, inside the private home of Gene Hackman. Then, the real bombshell: the names inside those files. A source close to the investigation described the moment federal agents found the secret room. One of them just looked at the stack of documents, turned to another agent and said, "This is worse than we thought." They packed it up and got it out of there before anyone else could take a real look. According to a source close to the investigation, some of the documents contained lists of high-profile figures: Hollywood executives, actors, directors, and even political officials. This wasn't just a collection of old personal records, it was something bigger. The kind of records someone wasn't supposed to keep.
Legendary film actor Gene Hackman, his wife, and a dog that authorities have called suspicious, including the reported condition of Hackman's and his wife's bodies and what an affidavit calls mummification in both hands and feet.
What was Hackman holding on to? And why did the FBI rush in before the media even caught wind of his death? It wasn't just about his past in Hollywood. If that were the case, these documents would have ended up in some journalist's hands, not a federal evidence vault. Instead, the FBI moved fast, removing what they found before anyone else could see it. This wasn't the first time an actor had been linked to something bigger than the screen. Hollywood has a history of buried secrets, of whistleblowers who vanish, of names that disappear before they can talk. But Gene Hackman? He was never one to chase controversy. He had no recent expose, no public feuds, no sudden urge to reveal anything. So why was he keeping records? And more importantly, who was he keeping them for? One file, according to insiders, was nearly 50 years old. The date marked on the cover placed it in the late 1970s. Right when Hackman was at the height of his career. Another document had handwritten notes and margins, dated just months before his death. That alone was strange. Was he updating these files? Was he tracking something? And if so, why would a retired actor in his 90s still be holding on to information like this? But the most unnerving part wasn't the documents themselves. It was the USB drive found locked inside the same room.
A joint suicide, but those things usually come with somewhat of a ritual where people will take an overdose, get in bed together, or hold hands sitting down.
You could also have an accident and a suicide.
You could have an accident and somebody saying, well, I don't want to live without him.
Labeled nightmare files, it wasn't just a collection of personal notes. It was something else. Something digital, something stored. That's what made it dangerous. Hard copies could be destroyed, lost, misplaced. But a digital record, that's traceable, that's recoverable. And whoever took it, they didn't want it found. It's unclear exactly what was on that drive. The moment the FBI removed it from the house, it disappeared. It wasn't logged in any public report, no one from the coroner's office mentioned it, and local authorities never got a chance to examine it. This wasn't just an investigation anymore, it was a cleanup. A quiet removal of evidence before anyone outside federal reach could dig into it. And then there was the biggest question of all. Who knew about this room before the FBI arrived? Because once the agents started collecting files, they noticed something else. Several documents were missing. Not misplaced, not scattered, but deliberately removed. An entire section of the files had been taken before law enforcement even got there. And that means someone else knew where to look. Which brings us back to that third phone found under the sofa. An iPhone 15 Pro Max, not registered to Hackman, not linked to Betsy, completely wiped, except for 3 missed calls from an anonymous number. Someone had been in that house before the authorities. Someone had taken something before the FBI. And yet, for all the evidence collected, for all the files seized, Hackman's cause of death is still unknown. What was he working on before he died? Who had access to his home? And more importantly, what did the FBI not want the world to see? And if we go back to the crime scene, it was anything but ordinary. Gene Hackman's body was found near the back door, with his cane and sunglasses lying just inches away, as if they had fallen from his hands in his final moments.
Hackman was found in a mudroom, and 65-year-old Arakawa in a bathroom where an open prescription pill bottle was on the counter along with scattered pills.
His posture was unnatural, not like someone who had peacefully passed in his sleep, but like someone who had been moving, trying to leave, trying to get somewhere. The placement of his body suggested he had either collapsed mid-step or had been interrupted before he could reach the door. Betsy Arakawa's body was in a completely different part of the house. She was found in the bathroom, her head resting unnaturally against the base of a counter, her hand outstretched. Pills were scattered across the surface. An open prescription bottle tipped over beside them. Near her, an overturned space heater was still plugged in, its power light flickering. The room was hot, dry, and suffocating. The kind of heat that speeds up decomposition. The kind of heat that makes evidence disappear faster.
Yeah, Craig, there is body camera footage. Right now, the Santa Fe Sheriff's Department says they're watching all that footage, which was taken by the responding deputies, and they do plan to release some of it.
By the time authorities entered the house on February 26th, the bodies were so deteriorated that their exact time of death was hard to pinpoint. The medical examiner estimated they had been dead at least 9 days, possibly longer. The conditions inside the home had accelerated the process, leaving Hackman and Betsy in a state that made it impossible to determine their exact final moments. But one thing was certain, this was not normal.
So the extremities can mummify relatively quickly in a hot ambient environment. It's hard without knowing how warm it was or dry it was in the house, but they've clearly been dead for several days, and I'm saying days plural, in order to get that kind of mummification.
When forensic teams examined the bodies, they found no immediate signs of trauma. There were no stab wounds, no gunshots, no defensive injuries, no bruising to indicate a struggle. But there were other details that made investigators pause. First, there was no forced entry. The doors were not broken or tampered with. The windows were secure. The alarm system, though old, had not been triggered. If there was no break-in, how did someone get inside? Or, more disturbingly, had someone already been inside when Hackman and Betsy were still alive? Then there was the issue of where they were found. Couples who die of natural causes inside their home are usually found together. One collapses, the other tries to help. Or, in cases of murder-suicide, one remains close to the other. But Hackman and Betsy were on opposite ends of the house, one near an exit, the other in an isolated room. It was too distant, too separate, too strange.
I don't want to get into too many details, but when the authorities use the term mummification or mummified, does that just mean liquid has, that it's just like skin and bones at that point, or what happens?
It means that the skin has dried. So what's happened is it's wrinkled up and it's dried, and it could be anything from kind of a leathery change all the way to the point that it's so hard that you can't even cut through it easily with a scalpel.
Investigators needed answers, but the conditions of the bodies made it difficult. Due to the dry, heated air, Hackman and Betsy's remains had mummified instead of decomposing in the usual way. Their skin had hardened, tightened, and dried out rather than breaking down. Normally, mummification takes months, even years, but the intense warmth inside the house had sped up the process unnaturally. The space heater next to Betsy had likely been running for days, transforming the bathroom into something closer to an oven than a crime scene. But here's where things got even stranger. Hackman was found in a climate-controlled room. The home's main air conditioning system was still operational. His body had not experienced the same level of extreme heat that Betsy's had. That meant two entirely different conditions of decay inside the same house. One body was drying out rapidly, the other was decaying at a normal rate.
They've got to go in every direction. They have to eliminate everything that it could be to find out what it is. Some of that will be in the autopsy. Some of that will be in the advanced stages of the toxicology, which could take 3 or 4 weeks or longer.
If both had died suddenly of natural causes, why were they not found together? If it had been a murder-suicide, why were there no signs of a struggle? No weapons, no note, no evidence of intent? And if someone else was involved, why were there no forced entry marks, no alarms triggered, no security footage of an intruder? Authorities checked Hackman's medical records for clues. He had been healthy for his age. Despite past heart issues, his last checkup showed stable vitals. Betsy had no known conditions that would explain a sudden collapse. But toxicology reports revealed something unsettling.
And we are still awaiting, of course, the toxicology results, which may not be available for weeks or even months, Craig.
All right. Liz Kurtzforce there. Liz, thank you.
There were pills found next to Betsy, yet her medical history showed she was not on any medication that could have caused a fatal overdose. The bottles at the scene did not match her prescriptions. Even stranger, Hackman's fingerprints were on the pill bottle, but Betsy's were not. If she had been taking medication herself, wouldn't she have left prints? Then came the final clue, the pacemaker data. Gene Hackman's heart stopped at exactly 2:43 a.m. on February 17, 2025. Not gradually, not over the course of hours. It flatlined instantly. That was the exact moment his pacemaker, a device that had been tracking every beat of his heart for years, recorded its final signal. The data leading up to it painted a picture of something that shouldn't have happened naturally. A forensic analyst reviewing the pacemaker records later admitted, "We don't usually see heart activity like this unless someone is in extreme fear or fighting for their life." And he said this because Hackman's heart rate spiked for 4 hours straight before it finally gave out. From 11 p.m. on February 16th until the moment his heart stopped, His body was under an extreme level of stress. Not mild distress, not the erratic changes of an aging heart, but the kind of spike that doctors associate with terror, panic, or intense physical strain. This wasn't someone passing away peacefully in their sleep. This was a man whose body was reacting to something unnatural. And then, suddenly, it wasn't reacting at all. Medical records confirmed that Hackman was in good health before his death. His last doctor's visit had been only weeks before, and his test results showed no indication of sudden heart failure. For a 95-year-old, his condition was considered stable. His medication was regulated, his blood pressure and cholesterol were controlled, and there were no signs that he had suffered any major health complications leading up to that night. While Hackman's pacemaker told one story, Betsy's actions before her death told another. Investigators found something chilling inside her personal drawer, a handwritten list of names, locations, and notes that pointed to some of the darkest allegations in Hollywood history. Betsy wasn't just an actor's wife, she had been looking into something dangerous, and based on what she left behind, she knew exactly how dangerous it was. She had been researching human trafficking networks tied to major Hollywood studios. Some of her notes listed production companies, talent agencies, and private clubs that had been whispered about for years but never officially linked to any crimes. Alongside that, she had written about Hollywood's long history of covering up child abuse. The names in her notes weren't just random figures, they were linked to real scandals, real lawsuits, and real victims whose cases never made it to trial. The same industry that had protected powerful figures for decades was now, somehow, tied to what she was investigating. And then, the detail that changed everything. She had been looking into the suspicious deaths of actors who had either tried to speak out or had gotten too close to something they weren't supposed to know. David Carradine, found dead in 2009 under circumstances so bizarre that even law enforcement questioned whether it was really a suicide. Brittany Murphy, dead at 32, from natural causes, a conclusion that her own father never accepted. These weren't just random names, these were people who had been in the industry, people who had connections, people who might have known something they weren't meant to know. And Betsy had been digging through all of it. Even more unsettling were her online search records. FBI cyber teams recovered data showing she had been looking up specific Hollywood elites accused of crimes that never went public. These weren't tabloid rumors or conspiracy theories. These were sealed legal documents, NDA-covered settlements, and cases that had disappeared before they could reach a courtroom. The question wasn't if she had found something dangerous. The question was, did she tell anyone about it? Because if she did, Hackman may not have been the intended target at all. It's possible that Hackman died because of what Betsy had uncovered. It's possible that she had been the real problem, the real threat, the one who needed to be silenced. And if Hackman had tried to protect her, if he had refused to hand over whatever information she had, that could explain why his body showed the signs of stress that it did. So, this story is far from over, and with new details possibly emerging in the future, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what comes next.